Pledges can be called many different things by different organizations, but Denari defines a pledge as a commitment to make a donation for a period of time in a variety of frequencies. Commitments can be made by donors for specific fundraising efforts and tracked by fund code. If you're a child sponsorship organization, the pledge is the link between the donor and the sponsored person. The pledge is the sponsorship. Payments on pledges can be made by credit card, electronic fund transfer, or check. Denari uses the pledge record to instigate automatic credit card and EFT transactions as well. Denari also offers several options for tracking pledges and notifying donors of their pledge status. Let's set up a pledge. The pledge belongs to the donor, so to create a new pledge, we begin by finding the donor's name record. We'll go to the Donors tab, Nameless Management, and then select the name record. Next, we'll go to the Other Pages drop-down field and find Pledges. This page shows a list of all open pledges for this donor. To create a new one, we'll click the Add New button. If you're a sponsorship organization, your first field will be the sponsored name. Click the question mark to the right of the field and select the child or person to be sponsored. When you complete the rest of the pledge form and hit Save, Denari will change the status of the sponsorship record to Sponsored. When gifts are made and linked to this pledge, the sponsorship is then updated. As mentioned earlier, the sponsorship is the pledge. The pledge is the link between the donor and the sponsored child. When the sponsorship module is on, and you will also have a field called Correspondence Contact. This is optional but can be used to link a second name record to the sponsorship. This might be someone who wants to also get information about the sponsorship from time to time. When you output pledge data from Pledge Segmenter, the correspondence contact address info will be included there. Everyone, whether you're a sponsorship organization or not, will have a description field. You can use this for whatever information you would like. Its great value, however, is in gift entry. The gift record has a drop-down field showing all open pledges for a specific donor. That field shows this description field contents. If the donor has more than one pledge, the description field in that drop-down field can show you which pledge to apply the donation. It helps you distinguish between pledges, so you will want to make your description distinctive here. The Close checkbox is used for just that, to close the pledge. Check the box when no further payments will be made to this pledge. If this is a credit card or EFT pledge that runs automatically, which we'll talk more about later, Denari will no longer process those transactions when the pledge is closed. If this is a sponsorship pledge, the person sponsored will become available again when the pledge is closed. The fund and fulfillment appeal codes are required fields. The fund code tells what the money that the pledge generates will be used for. The fulfillment appeal is really just a normal appeal code. It tells us what fundraising function generated this pledge. Both fields can be used to track pledges later on in reports. If you have questions about the use of these codes, please see the separate videos on these topics. The payment amount is just that. It's the amount that the donor will pay each pay period. Enter a number here with no dollar sign and no 0 decimals. So if the payment amount is $25, we can just put 25 into that field. Across from that is frequency. You can see in the drop-down that there are a variety of options, but monthly is the most popular. The start date is a required field. We must indicate when the pledge will start. It is also the anniversary date. For example, if the pledge is a monthly pledge for $25 starting on June 1, Denari knows that the $25 is due on June 1. On July 1, Denari knows that another 25 is due, etc. Denari can track who's behind in their pledge payments based on the amount due, which is based on the start date. We'll talk more about tracking later. The stop date is optional, but using it or not using it has consequences that you should know about. If you use a stop date, Denari knows exactly how many payments to expect. If we set the stop date at 12 months from the start date, then in our example, Denari can calculate the $25 payments times 12 and know that the total amount pledged is $300. In the upper corner here, we see a field called Total Pledged. The first field there will show us exactly what the calculation is. And in this case, when we save this pledge, this would become $300. We can now run reports that show the total pledged and quickly add up all the pledges to know exactly how much has been pledged in total. That's very handy for budgeting. The downside to using a stop date is that the pledge stops. If the donor wants to continue on with their pledge, someone has to either set up a new pledge or extend the stop date for this pledge. This requires more management effort. The advantage of not using a stop date is that the pledge never stops. This is, of course, great for EFT or credit card pledges. They'll just go on until the donor tells you to stop. The disadvantage of not using a stop date is that Denari doesn't know how many payments to expect, so it can't calculate an accurate total pledged amount. So what it does instead is use the number of payments from the start date. In our example of the $25 pledge starting on June 1, it will show the total pledged as $25. On July 1, the total pledged will be $50, etc. This makes calculating the grand total of all pledges more difficult. You now have to total up the payment amount of your monthly pledges, annual pledges, etc., and put it all together to arrive at a total. One other consideration. Denari also calculates the balance or outstanding field. This is the difference between the total pledged and the paid so far. If no stop date is used and Denari can't calculate the total of the pledge when then the outstanding field becomes irrelevant as well. There are other ways to determine if someone is behind in their pledge, however, so this may not be too big a problem. Ultimately, you'll need to decide whether to use a stop date or not based on the pros and cons of your situation. The next two fields are related to the pledge acknowledgement. Pledge acknowledgement is a statement format that Denari considers a one-time statement that is normally sent to the donor as confirmation of their pledge. The acknowledgement is by default an 8.5 by 11 page with the bottom 1/3 showing the pledge information and the top 2/3 showing a letter that you create. You can create your letters under the Gifts tab and then go to Letters. To use this, you check the Queue for Acknowledgement checkbox and then select your letter. The letter body then will be plugged into the top of that statement when you run the statements. Denari will create the statements and then uncheck the box so that when you set up new pledges, you won't repeat them. We'll cover this in more detail in a separate video. There's both a printed and emailed version if you have purchased the e-correspondence module. The notes field can be used for anything you want related to this pledge. If this pledge is to be paid by check, you can stop there and hit the Save button. At this point, Denari will create a pledge schedule. If you're using a stop date, Denari will calculate the correct number of payments. If you're not using a stop date, Denari will create a schedule with one payment more than what would normally be a year's worth of payments. If the pledge is a monthly pledge, for example, it will create 13 payments. The 13th payment is really symbolic of the fact that the pledge will continue on beyond the first 12 months. When needed, Denari will update the schedule as it moves into the 14th month. The schedule can be edited by clicking the Schedule button at the top of the page. By default, this page shows all payments in the future and filters out those in the past. You can change that filter by clicking the Quick Filter button if needed. If a donor calls to tell you that they can't make the August payment, for example, you can open the schedule and change the payment amount for that month to 0. And I'll just pick one here at random. If you're using a stop date, that will reduce the total pledged amount. You could add a new payment to the end of the pledge as well to make up for the missed August payment. By zeroing out the August payment, the pledge stats won't show that the donor is behind if you're sending out pledge statements. Denari calculates things like paid so far, ahead behind, due so far, days behind, average paid, etc. And Denari calls those stats. Calculating those is a time-consuming process that slows down the Denari servers. When you save the pledge, Denari will calculate them as of that moment, but as time goes on, the stats will then only be updated during the night. Occasionally, you may want to update the stats for a specific pledge rather than waiting for the nightly routine, however. You can do that by hitting the Stats button here in the button bar. That will run the process for that pledge and update all of the stats. There are some stats shown on the main page here at the top of the page, as you can see here on the left, but you can see more statistical information about the pledge by clicking the View Full Stats link to the right of the table. There's one field here that requires some explanation, and that is the due as of, or in the background, Denari calls this due so far. You'll see that in the pledge segment output as well. You'll see due so far. This can be a little confusing, but the key to this is the so far part. It shows what should have been paid to date. So if this is a $25 per month pledge and we are 3 months into the pledge, then the due so far field will show $75 regardless of what has been paid. In other words, it's not showing a balance or what is due. The ahead behind field shows the difference between what should have been paid, the due so far field, and the paid so far field. It shows if they are ahead or behind in their pledge as of this date. This concludes part 1 of pledge entry. We'll continue to the next video to learn how to set up credit card and EFT pledges.